Welcome to the ReGen Brands Podcast, the place for brands, retailers, investors, and other food system stakeholders to learn about the consumer brands supporting regenerative agriculture and how they're changing the world. I'm your host, AC. Thanks for tuning in. Now let's get into today's conversation. On this episode of the ReGen Brands Podcast, we're joined by Jason Haas, partner and general manager at Tablas Creek Vineyard. Tablas Creek is located in Paso Robles, California, is one of the pioneering wineries in the U.S. for regenerative organic farming, and was actually the first vineyard to become Regenerative Organic Certified. Jason shares the incredible origin story of Tablas Creek, born from a partnership between his wine importing father and the Perrin family of France. We explore how they brought Rhône varietals to California and why they started a grapevine nursery to supply both their own vineyard and the broader wine community here in the U.S. We dive into the challenges and opportunities of regenerative viticulture, from managing tillage to animal integration to water retention. Jason also unpacks the complexity of managing 270 acres while bottling 29 different wines in a single year. He shares insights on the economics of D2C versus wholesale channels and how they're balancing high regenerative and organic standards with industry-wide transition support. If you're curious about how regenerative farming shows up in your favorite glass of vino and what it takes to make that possible, this episode is for you. Let's dive in. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the ReGen Brands Podcast. Very excited today to have our friend Jason from Tablas Creek with us. So welcome, Jason.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
Good to have you, man. Always the first question we ask for those that are not familiar, what products do y'all produce and where can people find your products today?
So we are a winery in Paso Robles, California. We make wines. That's pretty much what we do, though. We do also, as a part of this, we do grow some sheep. So we sell a little bit of biodynamic and regenerative lamb here at the winery. You can find our olive oil in a few places, but no, we mostly make wine, which we sell about half of here direct at Tablas Creek, but you can also find it out at restaurants and some independent wine shops around the country.
Nice. And I purposely didn't say the full Tablas Creek Vineyard because I feel like that would have given away, the first answer. But we can address that now. Um, I really enjoyed learning about the history in our first conversation, and I think y'all do a nice job covering it on the website. But there's a really cool story between really your family history and this family in France that is the reason this vineyard exists and the reason that the brand exists today. So we'd love for you to have for you to detail that for us if you don't mind.
Yeah, so we are a partnership at Tablas Creek. We're equally owned and run by two families. One of the families is my family. My dad was Robert Haas. He was an importer of mostly French wines, but wines from around the world, all the way back into the 1950s. And the other partners in Tablas Creek are the Perrin family from Château de Beaucastel in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, whose wines my dad introduced into the U.S. market in the 60s and with whose proprietors he became friends. So it was on their trips to California to sell their French wines in the 70s and 80s that they became convinced that there was this opportunity to focus on the same grapes that they were using in the south of France in California. And whatever, 10, 15 years later, they finally decided to try it themselves. So that's how we ended up focusing on Rhône varieties, specifically Châteauneuf-du-Pape styled blends in principle here in Paso Robles, California.
If anyone's looking for me to have the nice French pronunciation of any of these words like Jason does, you've come to the wrong place. But I'm happy you can handle that for us, brother.
You grew up with a dad who was a wine importer with a lot of French suppliers.
Yeah.
You realize that your opportunities are a lot more exciting if you speak French. So you have a little added incentive.
Yeah. Do you speak French fluently or just like the key terms like that? Or
Yeah,
the
I'm
whole
pretty
deal?
fluent. I'm a little rusty at this point.
Yeah.
It takes me, I don't know, 4 or 5 days to really feel like I'm fully comfortable, but I've spent about a year of my life there all told. So yeah, my French is pretty good.
Amazing. Um, I want to actually get the dummy 101 varietals explanation from you right away because this is not something I'm familiar with, and I don't know what level of a wine consumer you really need to be familiar with it. Um, and it does seem very tied into the history of why specifically was there a desire to grow these types of grapes here. Can you just like break that down, I guess, into macro, and then why those Rhone varieties are so unique or special, or why that was and still is such a cool opportunity for y'all?
Yeah, I think the thing which is surprising to people is learning that there are something like 2,500 grape varieties that are used to make
Wow.
wine around the world. I mean, you
Wow.
ask the average American wine, even the average American like wine lover, they could probably name like 10. So,
Yeah.
um, and in some cases, there's a one-to-one tie between a grape and a place. So if somebody likes
Mm,
Burgundy and they like red wines, that they'll know that that's Pinot Noir. It's the only red grape you're allowed to grow in Burgundy. There's
mhm,
only one white grape you're allowed to grow, and that's Chardonnay. It's a little more complicated if you go to a place like Bordeaux, where the lead red grape is Cabernet Sauvignon, but there's also Merlot, there's also Petit Verdot, there's also Malbec, and then there's two whites that are allowed in Bordeaux. The Rhone is more complicated because depending on which region in the Rhone you're in, there's anywhere from 13 to 22 grape varieties that are allowed.
wow.
And the Southern Rhone is kind of this crossroads culturally, where you have a lot of influences coming down from more continental parts of France, and that brought grapes like Syrah, Viognier, and Marsanne. And then you have influences coming up from Spain, which brings grapes like Grenache and Mourvedre and Grenache Blanc. And then you've got grapes that evolved locally in the south of France that are added to this mix. So
Mhm,
the most Chateauneuf du Papes are mostly blends. They don't have to be. There's no reason why you couldn't make one that was 100% Grenache. It's just not the way it's typically done. And that's why it's often convenient to refer to them as like Rhône-style wines, because it's not like you can just name a grape and be confident
mhm,
that that wine is going to be made from just that grape. So
mhm.
that's when we started, we realized that one of the things that we needed to do was like start by importing grapevine cuttings, because there were
Yeah.
several of those traditional Rhone varieties that had never been used in America before.
Mm,
And that led us to also take a deeper look at the key varieties which were here, and we concluded that, like, yeah, maybe there was Grenache here, maybe there was Mourvedre here, but they maybe weren't the best clones of those things. So all of this allowed
yeah.
us, well, encouraged us to go in and take new cuttings of everything from Beaucastel, bring them into Tablas Creek, wait 3 years for them to clear quarantine, and then build a grapevine nursery, which, like, that was not originally part of the plan. We thought we were gonna be just growing grapes and making wine, but it turns out that when you bring grapevines into the country, you're not allowed to bring in the thousands that you need to start planting a vineyard. You're allowed to bring in 6 of each type, and then you need to propagate those into enough to plant, and that led us into a second business and a whole different relationship with kind of the California and Paso Robles wine community.
Yeah. It's super interesting. And am I understanding correctly, just at the very basic level, Rhone then as a word refers to that area of France where the varietals come from. And then it also is a word that refers to the group of varietals as we're talking about it from like a wine perspective, right?
Yeah, the
Okay.
Rhone is a river. So it's a river that
Okay.
flows west out of Lake Geneva and then goes basically west to the city of Lyon and then turns south and flows south from there into the Mediterranean.
Okay.
And if you see a wine that's labeled as a Côte du Rhône, Côte just means slopes. So sort of the
Mm,
slopes around the Rhone River. And because there's a family of grapes that all kind of reached their apex there, became popularized there, people will refer to that family in shorthand as saying, "Oh, those are Rhone grape varieties."
hmm. Okay. And did you grow up always thinking, hey, I'm going to be kind of a winemaker, vineyard operator? I'm definitely not going to do that. Like, what was your personal background and kind of when did you enter the business personally?
So my dad was an importer when I was growing up, not making wine.
Got it.
Tabla Street didn't
Hmm.
get started till I was finishing up high school. So this
Okay.
was not salient really as I was
Yeah.
growing up. But at the same time, again, I did tend, if I didn't get myself another summer job in high school and in college, I did tend to get sent to France to work at a winery.
Not a bad
Um,
option.
I mean, it was pretty great. I thought my dad was just trying to get me to work on my French, but
Yeah.
clearly there were deeper designs in here. Um, so it's interesting because as an importer, he was buying and selling other people's wines,
Mhm.
and I never really saw myself doing that. But I loved wine people. I loved the
Yeah.
family nature of it, the multi-generational nature of it, the connections that it had to history and culture. Um, and so it was on a summer when I was actually staying with and working with the Perrins at Beaucastel, and that
Yeah.
was a summer in between junior and senior year of high school, where I was like, "Okay, this piece of this I can see." Like, I can
Mm.
see really sinking my teeth into the making of wine and the business of a family winery.
Yeah.
But I also didn't wanna go straight into a family business right out of school, and I wasn't sure what aspect of this I wanted to do. I didn't think that, like, being a kind of technical winemaker was really my path into it.
Yeah.
And so I decided after I graduated from college in '95, and at that point, we didn't even have a winery building yet. We had some new vineyard planted. We didn't have any grapes in production. It
Yeah.
wasn't really a business. There was nothing particularly to do unless I wanted to come out and study grape growing. And
Mhm.
so I went to grad school, got a master's degree in archaeology, which I thought would give me a chance to travel and teach and work on
Mhm.
languages some more.
Yeah.
And then graduated, got my master's in '98, and it still wasn't really ready. Tablas Creek wasn't ready for me to be involved. So I went
Mm.
and worked in tech for 4 years. So
Okay.
got recruited to teach web programming languages. And that I went thinking I'd get a good technical education and
Yeah.
ended up getting what was in essence business school, joining this little tech startup where I was the
Right.
seventh employee and staying for 4 years and leaving when we had 80 employees and offices in 6 cities. And I gotten a chance to manage people and manage projects and write and teach and market and make a million mistakes. And then by 2001, Tablas Creek had grown into a business, and more than that, had grown into a business that was more complicated than I think my dad had originally thought. He
Mm.
he spent all of this time and worked with the parents to do this work of bringing in the right clones into California and planting the
Mm.
grapes in the right way and building their kind of winery and making wine. And I think his assumption was that because of the association with Beaucastel and his own experience working as an importer and with distributors, the
Yeah.
sales side of it would kind of take care of itself.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be a lot harder than he had thought because we were we were making blends, which didn't really have much of a category on the marketplace,
Mm.
from a part of California that nobody knew, from
Yeah.
grapes that people hadn't heard of and couldn't pronounce, with French names on the labels that didn't mean anything to them. So,
Yeah.
like, we had 4 strikes against us,
Right.
and, like, some people in the trade were excited, but it was a pretty heavy lift to translate that to the end consumer. So, we had
Yeah.
inventory backing up, we had distributors complaining. So, my dad essentially asked me to come out and figure it out from kind of a business and marketing standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, coming from a family business as well, there's some interesting ties. Not the same, different details, but same kind of overall, themes there. Um, Potentially another dumb question on the agronomic side, when you bring those varieties over and you talk about having to have them in quarantine, does that mean they can literally be in the ground and be planted, or are they literally, like, in a root cellar somewhere where they, like, can't be, access to the outside world? And then I guess another question is, once they're in the ground, is it 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 1 year before they're, like, production ready and producing fruit that can be actually used? Like, what are those timelines like?
So the quarantine happens at USDA licensed facilities,
Okay.
which are basically research universities. So
Yeah.
there are 3 stations that are right now do this quarantine process. One is in Geneva, New York, associated with Cornell. One is in Davis, California, associated with UC Davis, and then
Mhm.
one is at, I believe, Oregon State, in the
Okay.
Pacific Northwest. Um, so they're in greenhouses because what they worry about is viruses. They
Yeah.
don't want you to inadvertently bring in a virus that might spread and wipe out your industry.
Yeah.
Um, Once you get them released to you, once they've done all the tests that they need and know that the material is clean, then it's released to you. And it took us a couple of years to propagate enough vines to start planting the vineyard. So we got the vines out of quarantine in '94. sorry, 92, and by 94 we finally had enough to plant one hillside, so like
Mm,
5 rows of each variety up the side of one hill, just a couple of
okay.
acres. And then we took cuttings off of those vines as well as the vines we still had in pots in our greenhouses to plant most of the rest of our vineyard in 95, 96, and 97. And then once you plant it, it takes 3 years to get your first crop. Um, but
Okay.
that first crop is not usually a super big crop, and it's not usually a great crop either. You hear people talk about old vines, and the reason why old vines is a good
Yeah.
thing is that the roots are deep down into the soil, and they're pulling a lot of
Right.
character out. And a 3-year-old grapevine's not going to have roots deep down into anything. So,
Mhm.
in France, they often don't even start including the grapes from a block into their top wines until the blocks are like 15 years old.
Wow.
Grapevines then have basically a human lifespan if there's not something that kills them. So they you can expect them to live for 30, 40, 50, 60 years.
Yeah. That's wild. When you do a cutting, how difficult is that process? What part of the vine are you taking? How are you planting it? Like, I'm just super curious.
It's actually fairly easy. Grapevines are, I mean, they're vines. They're vigorous. They're
Mhm.
sprawling. They grow in a bunch of different ways. So all you need is a single bud
Wow.
of a cane, and then if you take that bud and you put it in the right medium,
Mhm.
roots will sprout out of the bottom, and a
Wow.
new shoot with leaves will sprout out of the top. So you can get dozens of cuttings off of a single vine in a single year. And
Wow.
it's not hyper technical either.
Mhm.
When we were doing this in a serious way, we were basically just like taking the cuttings, keeping them in the dark in potting soil until they sprouted roots,
Yeah.
and then planting them into little pots. I mean, it's an ancient way of reproducing certain kinds of plants that do
Mhm.
not breed true to type from seed. So,
Mhm.
if you have a grapevine that makes say you have a grapevine that makes Syrah, if you take a seed from one of those Syrah vines, it may or may not be Syrah. One of the parents is Syrah, but the other one could be some other kind of
Mm.
pollen that blows in. So
Mhm.
people don't propagate grapevines from seed. They take cuttings, and then the cuttings are
Wow.
clones of whatever you started with.
That's super interesting. Um, then what was the context of being in Paso Robles? Was there like no vineyards there when y'all started? Were there some? My understanding today is there's a few brands there and it's relatively developed in terms of winemaking, but were y'all kind of an early entry into that AVA at that time?
We were early without being one of the first. So
Yeah.
I think when we started, we were winery number 17 in Paso.
Mhm.
And there are vineyards here. There's a old bonded winery here from the 1890s. I mean, it's
Wow.
there. We are at the intersection. Our vineyard is at the intersection of two roads called Adelaide Road and Vineyard Drive. It's called Vineyard Drive because there were
Wow.
vineyards that were on there from before Prohibition. So
Yeah.
there's a grape growing history here, but I think it's fair to say that it was not really on most people's radar when we started here, as not on the radar as like the next great thing in California.
Mhm.
But it's grown enormously since we moved here. So if we were winery 17, there's now probably 270 wineries here,
Wow.
um, and it's gone from about 5,000 acres of grapevines to something like 45,000 acres of grapevines.
Wow.
So it's the third largest nexus of grape growing in America after Napa and Sonoma.
Yeah.
Um, we have about the same number of vineyard acres here as there are in the whole state of Oregon,
Wow.
just for comparison.
Yeah.
And the reason why we chose this spot was that like, this is where we found the right combination of soils and climate and rainfall that felt like it would be the best match for the southern Rhone because it's a Mediterranean climate there, and
Mhm.
um, they have a long growing season for France. They have a lot of sun.
Mhm.
Paso Robles does as well, and it was just for us a question of trying to match the raw materials up as well as we could, and figured that the rest would take care of itself, which took a little more effort than that, but
Mhm.
did ultimately work. It's been super exciting to see the community grow up around us.
Mhm. Has, those things that you knew that were a match basically between the climate and the genetics, has that relatively stayed the same, like, through the years as y'all have developed? the business and the systems and the agronomics as well, or has there been significant changes or things that have kind of changed that calculus at all?
No, they've stayed consistent. I mean, obviously, the
Yeah,
climate is changing, and we
yeah,
have to be conscious of that. But by and large, um, the essential research that my dad and the parents did to choose this spot, I think, has been validated by what we
yeah.
found and by the other winery vineyards and wineries that have moved to the area to focus on the same grapes.
And I believe the last time we talked, you told me y'all have been organic since inception or very, very close to inception. Was that, because your dad as an in or uh, your family as importers like thought that those wines were higher quality? Was it because the French family thought that that was the right way to do it? Like, where did that come from? And maybe how has like the that approach evolved over time?
I mean, yes to both cases.
Yeah.
So, at Beaucastel, they've been fully organic since the 1950s.
Wow.
And they only used chemicals briefly after World War II. And the patriarch of the family at that time, whose name was Jacques Perrin, decided in the mid '50s that it just didn't feel right, even though all of the
Yeah.
farm bureaus, all of the government agencies, all of the neighbors were saying, like, use these products. They are going to make you modern. They're going to protect you from disaster. They're going to protect all of us from disaster.
Yeah.
It just didn't feel right to him, and he went without using chemicals for a year in the '50s and was blown away with how much more those wines tasted to him like Beaucastel, like that
Mm,
place, than what he'd been
interesting.
making for the previous handful of years. And for them, that was it. That was the aha moment. They said, "Well, our goal is to make wines that could only come from this place. Putting these products on, these synthetic products on, like, that muffles whatever the expression is of the place. Therefore, we're not gonna do it. We gotta find another way."
Yeah.
So, we didn't know what the expression was going to be of the terroir here. Terroir, that's the
Yeah.
classic French term, like the character of place that shows through in a consumable product. But, we didn't know what that expression was gonna be here in Paso Robles, but we wanted to give ourselves every chance we could to show it.
Mhm.
So we knew we were gonna farm organically, and as we got deeper into the process, we realized that as organics is typically practiced, where you're replacing synthetic chemical inputs with non-chemical inputs, it's still pretty input intensive. And we have been for the last 20 years essentially trying to eliminate one input after another to maximize the expression of this
Yeah.
place. So that sort of led us to biodynamics, which led us to regenerative, and where we are now.
Mhm. Yeah, it's funny, the wine category in a way almost seems more advanced than others in my opinion, which could be totally wrong, but because of the advancement in biodynamics in that category first and how it kind of laid the framework to maybe not change a ton of what's being done and just kind of call it that term instead of having to do this long journey of transition. What has that specific transition been like for y'all specifically?
Yeah, I think it is true that wine has been able to be at the forefront of this. And I think there's two reasons. One is what you mentioned, that
Mhm.
there is a pretty long tradition of biodynamics in wine. The
Mhm.
other is that I think it's pretty easy to explain the benefits of farming better to the consumer in wine because they're used to thinking of it as coming from a
Yeah.
specific place. It's not
Right.
just about you're doing something that's better for the world. Like, yeah, but you are almost certainly making a better product. In a way, I
Mhm.
think that's would be more difficult if you're talking about a product that, like, cotton or soybeans
Yeah.
or something which is then processed into something else. Like, yes, I try to buy clothes made from organic cotton, but do I think that they make better clothes? Like, I don't know, probably not. But
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
wine, I think it's easy to translate that. Um, and I know that when the Regenerative Organic Alliance reached out to us to join the pilot program for Regenerative Organic Certified in 2019, like, they did it because we were already farming and certified biodynamic. We were already doing most of the things that they were interested in, and it wasn't going to be uh,
Mhm.
like this massive uh, transformation in what we did. They were looking for a winery, a vineyard and winery that could offer them feedback on the regenerative standards that they had,
Yeah.
and let them know how well they worked for wine.
Right. What is the most challenging or challenging as a group agronomic practices for vineyards specifically? What presents the hardest kind of path to adoption on the regen side?
So the where we are, it is hot and dry in the summer.
Yeah.
It stops raining in April. It does not usually rain again until November.
Yeah.
So water is water is critical where we
Mhm.
are. And one of the things that we are still figuring out is how we reduce our tillage
Mhm.
um, while still protecting our crop from competition with weeds and other things that are going
Right.
to further reduce the water resources.
Mhm.
Um, and further complicating that is that often when you don't till, you're leaving this permanent cover for burrowing rodents like
Yeah.
gophers and ground squirrels.
Yeah.
So we know. I mean, we try not to change everything without a kind of a test period where we can evaluate the results. But we know from neighbors who kind of precipitously just decided to go no-till in
Mhm.
blocks that they have lost significant numbers of vines to the competition from the plants and
Mhm.
competition from the rodents. So I would say that the tilling piece has been the one that we've offered the most feedback to the Regenerative Organic Alliance because a lot of the studies that have been done on no-till farming have been done in places like Virginia, where
Yeah.
it's wet and
Yeah.
you don't you have the extra ground cover is actually probably helping you concentrate your grapes if you're growing grapes, but it's not
Mhm.
necessarily the same issues that we're dealing with out here.
Are you guys irrigating at all to get some water, or is it all dry farmed? Or
So about half of our vineyard is planted relatively closely spaced on trellis with irrigation lines. We
okay.
have tried to wean those blocks off of irrigation, and we've gotten to the
Mhm.
point where now that the vines are 25, 30 years old, if we get good rain the winter before and we don't have too extreme a summer, we can go an entire season without irrigating at all. But, um, the other half of the vineyard block the other half of our vineyard acreage is much more widely spaced
Mhm.
and head trained, so no trellises, and that's planted without any irrigation infrastructure, and those we
Mhm.
only irrigate for the first couple of years in order to get the roots down just through that topsoil down into the limestone,
Mhm.
layers where there's more moisture, and that we do either by laying temporary irrigation lines just that are gravity fed from a tank, or in many cases, just by using these 5-gallon plastic buckets with a hole drilled in the bottom that we fill with a water truck twice.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
not very high tech, but the yeah, so we can irrigate about half the vineyard. We try not to, but if there's multiple years of drought or if we have a big heat spike coming at a critical period, we will give the vines some water in order to keep them going. We're not going to dry farm them just to prove a philosophical point and kill the vines or lose a crop because of it.
Yeah. Has the animal integration helped with any of those things that you've kinda just taken us through, or has it made it harder? What has
I
that
think
been
it's helped
like?
with everything, honestly.
Yeah.
Because what you're doing we got our first flock of sheep, small flock of sheep in 2012, and by 2016, it was big enough that we were 150 sheep. We had to hire a shepherd
Wow.
to run
Yeah.
the animal program. Um, so there are a whole bunch of benefits of integrating grazing animals into
Yeah.
a perennial crop like grapevines. I mean, you are returning a huge amount of nutrients to the soil. You are seeding the soil with all these healthy microbes that live in the sheep's stomachs year round. Um, and your additional organic matter in the soil also allows the soil to hold more moisture. So you have the benefits in terms of water retention as well as
Right.
the benefits in terms of fertility and soil microbiology. So I think it helps with everything. It
Mhm.
also is a good way of maintaining of getting rid of some of those weeds or at least keeping them from growing too aggressively without having to run a lot of tractors through. And
Yeah.
we have a new vineyard block that we've planted where we've trellised the vines up high, up
Mhm.
up at like 6 feet,
Wow.
which will allow us, once those vines are older and in production, will should allow us to keep the sheep in the vineyard through the summer, as opposed to now with the blocks that are trellised lower or
Yeah.
head trained lower, where we've got to get the sheep out of there at bud break. So no, I think it's that's been probably the biggest success of all of the things that we've done. Has been that animal integration.
And the lower trellis, you have to remove the sheep just because of the nature of where they're going to be in relation to the vines, or because the under canopy, like, vegetation is too high, or
Because they will happily switch from eating grass to eating the
okay.
new leaves
Yeah.
and clusters and fruit. So we right now we only have the sheep in the vineyard after harvest. So typically
Got it.
October we get them back in the vineyard. There's
Yeah.
not a lot of grass that really starts growing till January.
Mhm.
Um, and then we really need the sheep intensively in like late January, February, March, and early April.
Yeah.
And then by mid-April, we've had bud break and we've got to get them out or else they'll start to do damage.
Yeah. We don't want them eating the expensive stuff. That would be a no-go.
No, no, we we do not wanna be a very expensive farm for, 200 sheep a year, like, that would
Yeah.
be that wouldn't work.
Yeah. You don't wanna be vine-fed, lamb. That's not what you're trying to sell here.
It's
Uh,
not.
I saw the alpacas in the mix too. Is that like 1 or 2 alpacas that are like vineyard pets, or we got like full large amounts of alpacas integrated in with the sheep?
At this point, it's the former.
Yeah.
So we were at one point given 10 alpacas by a neighbor who was moving
Okay.
to town and didn't need the alpacas anymore, and they
Yeah.
were like, "Well, you've got sheep already, like, alpacas are perfectly compatible with sheep, you should,
Yeah.
do you want them?" And we're like, "Oh, sure, why not?" They're
Yeah.
kinda like big sheep. Um, and it turns out that while sheep are followers, alpacas are free spirits. And so,
Mm.
like, you move one sheep and all of the sheep follow, and the
Yeah.
alpacas scatter chasing butterflies. And so, like, we realized pretty quickly that we were spending more time moving 10 alpacas than we were moving 150 sheep.
Yeah.
Um, and so we basically haven't replaced the alpacas as they've died of old age.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
They also aren't as fertile as sheep are. Sheep, you tend to
Huh.
get a lamb pretty much every year from each of your ewes. And with alpacas, we only had 2 alpaca babies born here at Tablas Creek in, like, a
Wow.
dozen years.
Yeah.
So, they don't replenish themselves, they're a little more fragile, they need more veterinary care, and they're harder to move. So, we're down to 1, just the
Yeah.
last alpaca that was born here, like, 6 years ago, and he's become kind of our flock mascot.
Yeah.
He's very photogenic. He's pretty tame because he was born here. He's very comfortable around people, and
Yeah.
so like if people go up to take a picture of the sheep, like the sheep are kind of skittish and they like run off to the other side of the enclosure, and the alpaca just sort of like saunters up. He's like, "Hey, how's it going?" So we have like the alpaca in so many of our pictures because he's so photogenic and so friendly.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I would particularly recommend large numbers of alpacas as an effective
Yeah.
animal integration for a vineyard.
Yeah. It sounds like a difficult resource allocation and labor adjustment to really bake into your cost of goods and your operating model,
Yeah,
unfortunately. But, the lone alpaca is still bringing some fun value other places right now, so that's cool. Um, I also feel like I can't speak to the manufacturing on the winemaking side as well as I'd like to, and we've touched on it in a couple of the other winemaking episodes that we've had. And I would say what was illuminating in those conversations was, for lack of a better way to say it, like how bad conventional wine manufacturing kind of is, and there's a lot of chemicals and a lot of additives, and where potentially not related to the people that we've talked to, you could be doing a lot of good things on the agronomic side, and you're kind of, air quote, ruining it with the manufacturing. Um so I don't know. I would just love for your thoughts on, like, what do y'all do? How is that maybe different than kind of standard procedure? And how do you think the winemaking interplays with the agronomic side, on the regenerative organic side of things?
that's interesting. That take is more pessimistic than I think I would be about in
Yeah.
general how wine is made.
Yeah.
Wine is not a particularly industrial product. Even like a big corporate winery. I mean, they're probably adding yeast. Like they may add a few nutrients. It's
Mhm.
possible that um, I mean, they're going to do their best to stabilize a wine by adding a certain amount of sulfur, um, which again has been added to wine for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And they may filter or fine a little more than a smaller, more kind of boutique oriented winery would be. But it's still, in the grand scheme of consumable products, it's still a very unprocessed
Yeah.
sort of a beverage.
Mhm.
Um, so that said, what we do is very hands off. I mean, we ferment, we pick the grapes. They're all picked by hand. They are driven down in bins on the back of a tractor to where the winery is. If they are white grapes, they are pressed right away, so dumped into a press and squeezed, and then the
Mhm.
juice goes to barrels or tanks to ferment. If it's red grapes, they have to be destemmed first because you want to ferment them with the skins of the grapes, skins and seeds, but you don't want to ferment them with the stems, which have these bitter,
Mhm.
bitter tannins to it. Um, so those get destemmed and then pumped into tanks to ferment. And we don't inoculate with any yeast. We just use the native yeasts that are around in the environment.
Mhm.
Um, and we wait. Yeah,
Yeah.
you have to, for red wines, you have to make sure that they stay mixed a couple of times every day because otherwise the carbon dioxide bubbles that form in fermentation will attach to the skins and float all to the top.
Mhm.
And that's where most of the flavor and character is. And so you've got to keep that mixed with the juice that's below a couple times a day if you want it to continue to extract properly. But you can do that in a bunch of different ways. You can physically just like push those grapes down into the juice, or you can pump the juice from the bottom over the top, or you can splash the cap of skins apart. You have to do that a couple of times a day until you've gotten to the level of extraction that you want, which is usually 10 days or 2 weeks, and then you press
Mhm.
that off, and then it just goes into barrels to age. So like there are no additives there except for a little bit of sulfur, which, and the reason that wineries add sulfur is that at low levels, sulfur allows the yeasts that do fermentation to proceed, but
Mhm.
inhibit the action of vinegar causing bacteria. So
Okay.
you there's a narrow tolerance. You have too much sulfur and then nothing will grow. And you have no sulfur and everything grows, and you don't really want that either. So you want
Right.
this sort of narrow band where there's a little bit of sulfur that keeps your fermentation on a fairly straight track. But beyond that, like, there's really nothing that gets added. We'll put our blends together the following spring after things have done fermenting, and we have a sense of what their character is like, and then those
Mhm.
blends go back into large barrels to age for a little bit longer, and then they get bottled. So it's a um, I mean, I guess it is technically manufacturing, but it certainly doesn't feel like manufacturing in
Yeah.
any way that I
Yeah.
normally interpret that term.
Yeah. The entire timeline, the amount of time between fruit picked off the vine to it going into a bottle is then what?
It
So, like,
varies, it varies. So
yeah.
a rosé or a lighter white that doesn't need or benefit from aging time might
Mhm.
be 6 months. You might release it in, like, late winter or early spring right after harvest.
Okay.
A richer white that needs a little more time in barrel to deepen might be 9 to 12 months, and that might also be the same time frame for some of your lighter weight reds. And then a red that, particularly an ageable red that has a fairly large amount of tannin that you need to integrate and soften, that be more might be more like 18 months to 2 years after harvest you'd release it.
Wow. And there's like a sommelier, winemaker type person that's kind of constantly monitoring the the fruit as it's being, made into wine to say, okay, it kind of tastes like this. Here's where we're at. Like, is that just like a very specialized job that someone has to kind of like control that process and I don't know, QC, QA that, or what's that dance like?
So I think that's an area where you would see a bigger difference between a larger, more corporate winery and a small to
Yeah.
medium sized winery like us, where for us, like, we don't have a specific set of flavors that we want each one to become.
Mm,
If you were making millions of bottles and you were expecting every bottle to taste exactly the same from year to year, then there are certainly lab trained people who are measuring individual flavor components and saying, no, this
yeah.
needs need to move this out of here, put it into new oak to get a little more of that flavor. Or like, no, we
Mhm,
need to add a little more of this particular yeast to bring out this flavor.
yeah.
For us, We are monitoring it because we want to make sure that things aren't going off the rails. Like we don't
Yeah.
want to. We want to make sure that things are fermenting. Because you can end
Right.
up with a fermentation that, for whatever reason, the yeasts decide they're done and there's still some sugar left, and that's probably not what you want. Or you could end up with one of the wild yeast strains that we have that, like, all of a sudden takes off and takes over and might start tasting weird. In which case, you gotta get it
Mhm.
out of that barrel that it's in. Maybe you need to filter that and get it in with something else that is going in the direction you want. So we're just making sure that things are, like, within our tolerances, but we're
Mhm.
not aiming for specific flavors. And so it's not until the following spring that we really care what it tastes like. It sounds like a weird thing to say, but
Yeah.
we
You're
care that
trusting the
it's
process.
yeah, we care that it's
Yeah.
fermenting properly, and
Yeah.
trust that we're gonna like the end result. But it's in the spring where we then take all of these 150 different components that we might have had during harvest, and then put them together to make the 20 wines that we're gonna make for the year. And at that
Mhm.
point, there are usually 6 or 8 of us around a table making these evaluations,
Yeah.
and it's not like like we're running it through a piece of machinery that's telling us you've got X amount of this component flavor and the Y amount of that component flavor. It's just us tasting it and saying, okay,
Yeah.
this is a very rich and powerful, but pretty tannic. We should probably be blending it with something that's fruitier and friendlier to make a wine that has, like, the best of both worlds. It's very much um, a kind of an iterative process based on our tasting and our discussions.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fun. Um, I'm I want to shift to the commercial side of things, and I'm sitting here thinking of literally like 1,000 plus questions that I could probably ask. Um, and I'm thinking back to when you first showed up and your dad was like, "Hey, help me figure this whole sales and marketing thing out." Which sounds like that was at least what 20 plus years ago.
Well,
Um,
20 to 23 years ago.
so I'm sure there's been quite a few learnings, pivots, lessons along the way. Um, maybe maybe the best starting question there, Jason, would be: can you just articulate like how the revenue channels are broadly split up, without giving anything proprietary or confidential away, but like, you guys do some e-commerce, you do some on premise, you do some off premise, you do like some direct selling maybe at the vineyard. Like, can you articulate that at a high level, and maybe we can dive into some channel specific questions or take it from there?
Sure. So if you look in terms of volume, we sell roughly a quarter of our volume in each of 4 ways.
Okay.
A quarter of it goes out through wholesalers around the country and a few export customers, and
Uh-huh.
then to restaurants. A quarter of it goes out through wholesalers and goes to retail. A quarter of it gets sent out in our wine club shipments, semi-annual wine club shipments, basically subscriptions that people have that will
Yeah.
get either 1 or 2 or 3 shipments a year from us. And a quarter of it either goes out from our tasting room or from supplemental orders that we get over our website or by phone, um, from people, many of whom are also wine club members, who may get
Mhm.
a bottle of 6 different wines in the spring and really fall in love with 2 of them and want to get 6 more bottles of each of those 2. So it's
Yeah.
basically a quarter wholesale to restaurants, a quarter wholesale to retail, a quarter wine club, and a quarter other sorts of orders, tasting room and discretion, what think of as discretionary orders.
Yeah.
Um, it's important to note, though, that because a quarter of our volume goes out in each, it does not mean that each brings in a quarter of our revenue.
Yeah.
Um, the direct to consumer side of things, even though it's only half of our production, is something like 80% of our revenue. And
Wow.
that's true because I mean, we're selling at retail, even though we're giving good discounts to club members, we're still
Right.
doing a lot better than we are if we sell at wholesale, which then, because of the way that alcohol has to be marketed in the United States, has to go first to a wholesaler and then to a retailer or a restaurant and then to a consumer. And you have to basically back out all of those markups for your original selling price. Um, and then partly because, in general, in the wholesale market, the all the incentives are there to sell your least expensive wines.
Right.
So those are the things that are generally the most available for restaurants to pour by the glass, which is more
Right.
volume than if you just get a placement on a list. Or those are the things that a retailer might feel confident enough that they could buy a 3 case stack of instead of like, I'll buy 6 bottles and put it on the shelf. So compared to that, when people come to our tasting room and people who sign up for our wine club, they're generally interested in buying the best and most distinctive things that we make, not the
Right.
cheapest things that we make. So
Right.
you have a skew also in the kind of product mix, as well as the fact that we're selling at a, a discount off of retail instead of at wholesale.
Mhm. I I feel like that's a very interesting piece of trying to think of this whole regenerative thing, with wine is the sales and marketing tactics tied to regenerative or regenerative organic certified specifically probably could be or almost needs to be different for all 4 of those slots because it's a different purchasing decision really, or it's different purchasing decisions across the chain that kinda gets you to someone actually drinking the wine. Um, how do y'all think about that specifically to being rock and, like, trying to tell that story and trying to use that for differentiation?
It's really interesting. I think it adds essentially a tailwind for certain customers
Mm,
in all of the different channels,
yeah,
but the degree to which it's important is incredibly heterogeneous. Like
yeah.
there are there are retailers who could not care less that the wine is rock certified. There are also retailers for whom that's a decision factor, and everywhere in between. Like there's a lot of others who are happy to know that this wine that they like is also produced in this way that they feel good about, that they can talk to their customers about.
Mhm.
In general, and it seems weird to say, it is, I think restaurants are by and large less concerned with that because people don't see the bottle until they order it.
Right, right.
Um, they are more, I mean, they're happy to know that, but they're not usually using the fact that it is farmed in a particular way as a selling point.
Mhm.
Um, and then in terms of our direct sales, I mean, do I think that we've gained a lot of wine club members because of the way that we farm and the way that we talk about our farming? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But we're choosing which wines to send them. Um, and in our tasting room, again, some people come in specifically because of our farming, and they want to learn more, and they want to support a winery that is regenerative and biodynamic. And there are others who don't know anything about it until we start telling them. But I feel like it's never a negative. It's something which just matters in widely varying degrees to different customers and gatekeepers.
Yeah. And it seems like, especially in wine, the direct to consumer interactions, it does carry more weight because it's so tied to place, like you said. But ultimately, my assumption is, and correct me if you feel differently, uh, for those consumers, for those customers, they're really saying like, I'm buying this from Tablas Creek, and I think they farm in this really cool, unique, sustainable way. They're not necessarily saying they're organic, they're regenerative organic. Maybe they are saying they're organic because I think we're at a different place there than rock. Um, but it it's more so loyalty and retention around they farm this way, that's the Tablas Creek way, more so than they farm this way with any insertion of the word regenerative into it. Is that you agree, disagree?
I would agree. I would agree, at least in broad strokes, though we are more and more getting people who are aware of regenerative, and
That's great.
once they become aware of regenerative and start to search in the wine world, it doesn't take them very long to get to Tablas Creek.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I think it's become a little bit more of a driver, and it's also been valuable in that it gives us a kind of a defined set of protocols that we can that has a name that can represent what what we've been doing, and that's helpful. And it's
Yeah,
helpful also, I think, that it's divorced from some of the mystical elements of biodynamics, which
yeah.
I think can be, there are people who are all in on that, but it also can be a turnoff for
Right,
people. And it's nice that regenerative
right,
is more science based than that.
yeah. We see on the natural channel grocery, food and beverage side of things that retailers and category, category buyers, category managers are specifically saying, "Hey, we are looking for regenerative certified products to increase our selection of them." Are you seeing that on the wine side, on the wholesale side as much, or not yet?
Yes, but
Yeah,
Um, we are seeing it, but what they really want is they want, okay, like we want this wine that is regeneratively farmed and there's a certification on the label and we want it for $15.
right,
Like
right.
there there's still um there's still a lot of kind of price driven buying, and by far the largest segments of the wine world are under $20,
Yeah,
where the economics of farming regeneratively and producing a wine at $20 is really challenging.
yeah.
So, um, I think uh, I think there is a desire there, but I don't think it has translated in a particularly meaningful way into changing the sets on the chain retail grocery shelves towards
Mhm,
regenerative.
mhm. And I think, like, I have a curiosity around it's very clear Tablas Creek is doing a good job and continue to do an even better job of marketing itself. And there's just like very clear basics. Like you're a business, you should market what you do, and rock's a part of that. When you think about just like the wine category and creating more demand for rock, what do you think are the levers there? Like, is there like some sort of in with sommeliers that we got to do? Is there some sort of in trade like collaboration? It actually seems to me from being someone that puts together a weekly newsletter and follows press releases that a lot of the rock winemakers are doing a really good job touting it, at least in trade media, and even collaborating with each other, like via the One Block Challenge and other things. Um, that seems more B two B though than on the demand side. Like, what do you see as opportunities there specifically to wine?
It's interesting because I agree that I think a lot of the communication has been kind of within the community, within the grape growing
Yeah,
winemaking community. I have been hoping that the retailers for whom this should be a driver, kind of think the Whole Foods of the world,
yeah,
um, would play a larger role in this, and I
yeah,
think it will happen, but I don't think it's happened yet. Um,
yeah,
so that's a place where I feel like there's real opportunity,
mhm,
in some of those more kind of organic leaning, natural leaning, chain retail.
yeah,
Um, But again, that's such a the price is such a consideration.
right,
If you go to Whole Foods and you look at their wine set and you look at the percentage of the wines that sell for $30 and above, like
mhm,
in most of the ones that I go to, it's like less than 10% of the wines that are there. And so
yeah,
they just I don't think they felt like they can yet ask their customers to make that leap. I think they've made the leap in a large way into organic, at least.
mhm, mhm,
Um, and we've all benefited from the improvements to the kind of organic grape growing used to be in order
yeah,
to use any sort of organic certification or say organic at all on the label, you had to also be no sulfites, which meant that a lot of those early wines were volatile and
mhm,
not very good,
yeah.
made more for the organic market than for the fine wine market. But that's really changed in the last 15 years. And I think
That's good.
consumer perception has changed with it, but there's a pretty big leap between like made with organic grapes and regenerative or biodynamic in terms of the investment that's required.
Mhm, yeah. I I think, I'm very interested also to see how specifically the agronomic adoption happens in wine, um, because I think there's some very unique dynamics with the category. I think there's very unique dynamics with kind of the AVAs and the cultures and the families and the vineyards and um, I'm sure the pride that's associated with a lot of those things. Um, and I've seen publications and articles where uh, people in the wine community that are rock or are some high integrity regenerative standard are worried about greenwashing and kind of lower barrier to entry regenerative standards, which I think are totally validated. Um, and it's like, how do we encourage transition and reward transition while also holding the highest bar and making sure people are still advancing to that? Um, I was something I saw on the website that piqued my curiosity. I'm looking down at my notes here. y'all work with 8 to 12 other growers to sell some $28 a bottle wines that aren't necessarily all rock or all organic, but it is a tool, hopefully, to help some of those folks transition to more of those practices. So I would love for you to just maybe talk us through like that project or the idea behind it, and also how you think about being one of those standard bearers of the highest bar, but also like, hey, we're trying to help the whole industry be better here, but also there needs to be kind of integrity, honesty, and
Yeah.
differentiation from those that have earned it.
Yeah, for sure. So these wines, we call them Patelin de Tablas, and Patelin is French slang for neighborhood. So these are
Oh, that's
wines that we
awesome.
source from our neighborhood,
Yeah.
and typically all from growers who bought grapevine cuttings from our grapevine nursery. So these are like
Mm,
the descendants of the vines that we brought in, just
yeah,
planted in a handful of vineyards around Paso Robles.
that's cool.
Um, and so we started this back in 2010 when there were maybe 3 organic certified vineyards in Paso Robles,
Mm,
and none of them had any fruit for sale. Um, and there
mm,
were not many more than that that were even farming organically. So, like, that
wow.
wasn't even really an option. We could not, if we wanted to make this wine, we could not require that these be organic sources.
Yeah.
But, we became kind of increasingly uncomfortable with the the difference between that and the way that we were farming our own vineyard,
Mhm.
and we were also super interested to see the the growth in the number of vineyards that were farming organically, even if not certified, the growth in the ones that were certified, and the adoption of the ability to sort of check a box to farm organically with some of the vineyard management companies. That was definitely not an option 15 years ago when we started.
Yeah.
Now it is. All of the major vineyard management companies, like, you could say, "Okay, I want this block farmed organically," and they'll
Mm,
just take care of it. You don't need to have the expertise in-house.
wow.
So in 2022, we made the decision that we were going to give our growers 5 years to be farming organically. We were told them 2022, so by 2027, if you are not farming organically, we are not going to buy your grapes anymore. We'll give you
Wow.
the help that you need, whatever we can provide in terms of expertise in helping you in this transition. We'll give you a boost in what we pay. We'll give you a 10% boost in
Yeah.
what we have been paying you. Um, and if you just feel like you can't make this switch, great. This gives you enough time to find new buyers for your product and gives us a new time to develop new sources. So, we were expecting it would take like that full 5 years to get
Yeah.
to that transition, and we were able to do it by last year. So by last
Nice.
year, everybody who we signed a contract with for the year
Mhm.
was was farming organically. It doesn't mean that they were all certified, but they were farming
Yeah.
organically to the satisfaction of our viticultural team. Um, so that's sort of where we are. And they're just because they're farming organically doesn't mean that they would even qualify for certification. In many cases, they might be in the first year of a transition of not
Right.
using chemicals. But in order for us to start buying from them to have a contract to do this, they need to agree to stop using chemicals and move towards organics. So um, it does feel like this is one of the ways that we can use our platform to help encourage
Right.
people um, to adopt better practices, but it also required the community to be at a point where this was something that, again, the big vineyard management companies could do. Um,
Mhm.
so, I mean, I would love one day to have those Patalan wines be able to be organic certified. I don't think we'll
Yeah.
ever get to the point that they would be regenerative
Yeah.
certifiable, but, like, I can see maybe, I don't know, 5 or 10 years that we would be able to ask that people not just be farming organically, but be certified, and we'd be able to have that CCOF seal on the label of Patalan wines, but we're not quite
Yeah.
there yet.
Yeah. That's super cool. How many what like I if you don't know the exact number, I'd be surprised if you did, honestly, but what ballpark percentage do you think of vineyards is managed by one of those third parties that you've alluded to a couple times?
70?
Yeah. So, like, that's a key thing. Like, if those people can't help with these agronomics, like, you're dead in the water. You're dead before you start. So, that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely, and that may be low, it may be higher than that,
Mhm.
but
Wow.
yeah, it's definitely the majority of the vineyards that are out there, the vast majority of the vineyard acreage that's out there.
Mhm. And I think it's a really cool way that y'all are, like, trying to do your part. Both there's a self-interest business side of it of, like, you are producing a product and selling it still, and you're probably still selling those folks, the cuttings from the nursery, but you're also helping them transition to better practices, and you're using, um, combined business interests to basically help with that, so I think that's really cool. Um, I wanna double back to I asked you that question in a really long question. The broader, more macro, like, industry side of, like, holding the high bar while advancing, transition and kind of how that works from a certifications, claims, consumer marketing perspective. Like, how do you tackle that one? How do you think about that one?
I think we just try to be clear about what we do on our estate and what our
Yeah.
estate wines are,
Mhm.
um, and also try to be clear in the cases in which, like, that's not what we're doing, we try not to
Yeah.
blur that line, so, like, if
Mhm.
you look on the back label of all of our estate wines, it has those CCOF organic and the rock, um, gold seals. Um, when like, on the Catalan wines, on the back label, if you look there, we actually list all of the vineyard names that we get the fruit from, the
Oh, that's cool.
percentages that come from each one. So we're trying to be like, we're trying to keep that line between what is estate and what is not estate as clearly delineated as we can, while still having everything inside a Tablas Creek labeled bottle. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
that we had actually talked at the outset of the Catalan programs, like, do we want a different label design? Do we want to put it out under a different name? 'Cause there's certainly plenty of examples of wineries doing, like, a second label under a different name.
Yeah.
And we thought that that would not be the right choice. That, first of all, um, if it would be harder to help these wines succeed if it didn't say Tablas Creek. And if they did succeed, it would be harder to have that have people then, like, rise up into the estate wines that are also labeled
Mhm.
Tablas Creek. So
Mhm.
we recognized that that raised the bar on the quality that the wine would have to provide, and we were okay with that. Um, and I think we have in the last 3 years, helped address some of the discomfort that we had with the differences in the farming practices. That was a source of a certain amount of, like, internal discomfort that we didn't love that, we were talking all about the great things we were doing in the vineyard, and yet we were making a wine that was coming from non-organic sources. Uh,
That leads into another question I was curious about, and this could also just be once again my ignorance of wine as a category. But, like, to me, wine would seem to have a very unique list of things that need to be considered for innovation and new product development. Like, I saw y'all have done some boxed wines. Um, I'm sure there's ways you've blended the products over time that's changed. Like, can you give us a layman's explanation of, as a wine brand, here's how we would think about, how we evaluate the current products and think about introducing new products?
Yeah, I think it's a really perceptive question. So you're right that in a lot of cases, the innovation doesn't happen with the wine itself. The
Right.
innovation happens with how the wine is packaged or marketed.
Right.
Because, like, wine is this incredibly long tradition that we're all fitting into. Um,
Yeah.
and, like, short of using different fruit to make wine, I mean, we have consciously chosen to place what we do in a tradition from the old world, in that Rhone tradition.
Right.
Um, that said, we're not trying to make replicas of what they make in Chateauneuf-du-Pape or in the Rhone,
Yeah.
and we do that in a couple of different ways. One, I mean, our flagship wines are Chateauneuf-du-Pape inspired blends, both red and white. But we also do a lot of varietal bottling that they don't do in the Rhone, including
Mhm.
several grape varieties that are so rare that we don't believe that they have ever been bottled. Like, in the last
Wow.
50 plus years.
Yeah.
And we've had winemakers from the Rhone Valley make the trip to Tablas Creek to taste these grapes that don't ever get bottled on their own in
Wow.
their original location.
That's cool.
Um, so that's a part of it. A part of it is not feeling tied to this one particular model that is a blending model that's used so much in Chateauneuf du Pape. Part of it also is looking at other areas in and around the Rhone for inspiration. So, for
Mm.
example, you are not allowed to make a rosé in Chateauneuf du Pape. Um, if you do, you lose the ability to call it Chateauneuf du Pape, and it becomes just a Côte du Rhône. So,
Wow.
Chateauneuf du Pape as an appellation is for red wines and white wines.
Okay.
Um, just across, just across a governmental border is the appellation of Tavel, where the
Okay.
only wine that you can make is rosé.
Ah, there we go.
They grow the same grapes, um, but the Tavel appellation requires that you make a rosé. You can't have a Tavel white. You can't have a Tavel red. It has to be rosé. And so, yes, our grapevine cuttings come from Chateauneuf du Pape, but we've been able to look at other areas in the Rhone and say, okay, that looks like a fun tradition that we'd like to explore. So we do a
Mm,
Tavel inspired rosé. We also do a Provence inspired rosé, which uses similar
mm.
grapes but is made quite differently, much paler, more kind of white wine in style. And that all has allowed us to feel like we have enough runway to experiment in different ways of putting together the different components that we come in ways that are always fun and compelling without feeling like it's just a free for all and we can like do whatever we want. Let's add some
Yeah.
Merlot and let's make blueberry wine and um, so I think it's important as a brand to have some boundaries to know to
Yeah.
know who you are and within what parameters you can experiment. And I'm grateful that the Rhone offers us such a rich tapestry of examples that we can draw from and so many grapes that we get to work with that it doesn't feel like we're just rolling out the same idea again in
Yeah.
a new packaging.
Yeah. That's really cool. Um, that was awesome. I just learned a lot. That was sweet. I appreciated that. Um, there's another thing I'm curious about, which is um, the the e-commerce success that you've had. Um, I think in the last conversation, I don't remember what year you said you started working on it, but I think it was pretty early in terms of like what most people would consider focusing on e-commerce. And I want to say the number you gave me was there's over 11,000 people that are buying at least one time a year, right? Via that, you have that many members. Um, what has been the lesson there? What's been the secret to success? Is it just like, hey, we have all this kind of agritourism foot traffic to the vineyard itself, and we just have a really strong conversion rate of those people? Is it, we've just done a good job over a long period of time getting people on the list, and the product's so good they kind of never leave? Like, what have you learned in succeeding there?
I think there's aspects of both of those pieces. I also think that wine in general, the kind of wine club model was such a dominant model all the way back into the relatively early 2000s
Hmm.
that like a lot of wineries had to figure out the e-commerce piece and
Yeah.
were helped by the fact that there was a Supreme Court ruling in 2005 that
Right.
opened up most of the country, or at least set the conditions for the opening of most of the country to be able to sign up for a wine club and receive the wine at their house. Um, and this is this was driven home to me during the pandemic when there were lots of products, lots of different other sorts of um,
Yeah.
producers who suddenly had to scramble and figure out how to get their product to customers who couldn't any longer find it in the places they were used to buying it.
Yeah.
Whereas for us, like we'd already figured all that out. We had licenses to ship to 45 states. We had a fulfillment provider that did all of the managing of this so that if we got 1,000 orders in a week, we just turned it over to them and they made it all happen and go and
Yeah.
get to the right place. So we'd had to navigate a lot of those things just because that was one of the dominant models by which wine was sold.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that why we have particularly been successful is I think we do have a lot of diversity within what we do. We have both a focus so that if people like one Tablas Creek, they're probably going to like another Tablas Creek. But it's like I think we bottled 29 different wines last year. So
Wow.
we don't we don't have to send out just the same thing every time to these club members who might have been members for 20 years because
Yeah.
it's a pretty good recipe for at some point having people say, "Yeah, I've seen this movie already." Like I don't need
Yeah.
like
You need to keep some novelty in there. Yeah.
yeah, I don't need sequel number 12. So I think we've been able to maintain a consistent style, been able to produce a lot of different wines within that, and been able, thanks to our importing of new grape varieties, to feel like we're continuing to break new ground.
Mm,
Um, and then I would also say that we make a real point not to take our wine club members for granted. Um,
mm,
I think sometimes with a subscription model, the temptation can be there to say, okay, we can't sell this in another way. Let's send it out to the people who have said that they'll buy whatever we send them.
right.
Um, and that's not a temptation that I've ever been particularly tempted by.
Yeah.
So we do everything we can to make sure that members of our wine club feel like if they have an idea or a complaint or an issue that we're addressing it and taking it seriously. Um, and and we've been rewarded with a lot of loyalty. I mean, I know I looked earlier in the year and we've seen as overall as the demographics of the wine buyer gets older,
Mhm.
um, that we've seen a little increase in wine club cancellations in the last couple of years compared to what
Mm,
we saw before that. But I
mhm.
looked and our median length of membership is still something like 40 months, which is little over
Wow.
3 years.
Yeah.
And the industry average is something like 12 to 15 months.
Wow.
So we know that compared to what we're being told is normal, that we're still doing really well. And I try to I try to spend a lot of time thinking about why that is and how we can keep it going.
Yeah. Amazing. Um, Super fun, super informative conversation. I appreciate it. I, uh, I will wrap us with the final question that we ask everybody, which is very macro, and curious to hear your take on it. Um, how do we get ReGen Brands to have 50% market share by 2050? What needs to happen for that to happen?
I think we all need to be talking about not just the benefits to the world, but the benefits to the products.
Yes.
Um, so there are people who will make buying decisions based on these like more global ideas,
Right.
but I think a lot about how we translate to people the fact that because this is made in a way which is better for the soil, better for the land, better for the people involved, like there are real benefits to you who is buying this product because the product itself is better. The
Mhm.
plants that produce it live longer. The soil is healthier. There are fewer additives. You know exactly what's in there. Um, so I think it has to go beyond just the people who are making purchases for altruistic reasons. It
Yep.
has to be translated directly into the quality of the products. And this is why I think wine has such an important potential role to play in this is that people are so used to thinking about the decisions that happen at a farming level as having a positive impact on the wine that they consume in a way that they're not with a lot of other things that
Yeah.
I think we have to be in a leading role in talking about this.
Mhm. Yeah. I love that. Lead with the self-interest and in a way that's product specific that someone can actually understand, and then follow with the altruism instead of what I think the vast majority of our marketing efforts are as a group is we're leading with the altruism and we're never even really getting to product specific self-interest at any point in time, unfortunately.
I think you're right.
Yeah. Amen. Thank you so much for joining me, man. Really appreciate it. This was awesome. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yep. Thanks, Jason. For transcripts, show notes, and more information on this episode, check out our website, regen-brands.com. That is regen-brands.com. You can also check out our YouTube channel, ReGen Brands, for all of our episodes with both video and audio. The best way to support our work is to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe to future episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. You can also subscribe to our newsletter, the ReGen Brands Weekly, and follow our ReGen Brands LinkedIn page to stay in the know on all the latest news, insights, and perspectives from the world of regenerative CPG. Thanks so much for tuning into the ReGen Brands podcast. We hope you learned something new in this episode and it empowers you to use your voice, your time, your talent, and your dollars to help us build a better and more regenerative food system. Love you guys.